It's the afternoon. How's everyone doing? Hello, yeah, come on, more of that. So much to take in today, right? It's pretty crazy. Well, we've got an exciting afternoon, last hour of the day before heading off into other things. And we're gonna start the next half an hour is going to be talking about Go Flight. Go Flight at Air and Space, and I have had the pleasure of participating with this in person, and it's absolutely amazing. And we've got a great panel of people talking about it here. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Weitekamp. I'm a curator at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. I'm really pleased to be here today with my colleague Vicki Portway, also from the National Air and Space Museum, and with Troy Lachance, who is here from Bluecadet. And we wanted to talk to you today about Go Flight, which is the digital engagement system and visitor experience that we created in association with the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall at the National Air and Space Museum. I show you the National Air and Space Museum building on the National Mall, in part just to kind of orient you to where we were starting, but also we have the privilege and the burden of being one of the most visited museums in the world. Behind the Chinese National Museum in Beijing, the Louvre, and we kind of go back and forth with the Smithsonian's own National Museum of Natural History in terms of visitorship. That means that when we try to redo our big central hall, we are thinking in many different ways about how this space gets used. So this is the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. That's that big central hall. Has anyone been to the National Air and Space Museum?
What?
Good room, very good room. We did formative evaluation when we started this process. In 2013, we learned that Boeing would be giving a very generous gift to the museum that came with a naming opportunity, and part of that money would go to the opportunity to redo the Central Hall for the first time since the National Mall building opened in 1976. And when we were looking at redoing this space, it really allowed us to develop the digital elements that we wanted to talk about today, because they became elements that really underlay a museum-wide transformation of that National Mall space that we were doing. So it gave us the naming opportunity of it becoming the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, gave us the opportunity for a complete physical redo, thinking about the interpretation of the objects and the layout of the space, but also to think about a new digital strategy. How would we bring this building built in celebration of the bicentennial of the United States in 1976 into the 21st century? And what our evaluation really showed us is that that was a really multi-use space, right? It's our entranceway, it's our exit, it's where people gather, it's where people first know that they're actually in the National Air and Space Museum. And it is a space where people are getting that kind of lobby experience in the corporate sense, right, of who are we, but also what are we about as a museum. And they're doing all of those things simultaneously as they're trying to gather the family, figure out where they want to go next, or gather the family and get their last impression as they head out. And so this was a gallery where we were doing the physical exhibit, and this shows you the Milestones of Flight Hall as it's finished, and also then simultaneously and in parallel developing the digital elements of that, which is not usually what the museum has done. We had a workflow previously of kind of 6 months before the exhibit opening saying, hey, shouldn't there be a website? And now this was a chance to really, from the beginning, to think about digital elements, social media, and how we wanted to put that out. And so what we came up with is what we ended up calling this experience loop. And we were very excited to bring Bluecadet on board to work with us. They're based up in Philadelphia. And so because end to end they were doing all of the elements of this, we knew that they would all speak to each other, and that people would be able to experience the content kind of moving fluidly from form to form. So we ended up building the big Media wall in the middle there is a 3x7 matrix of
12
very
foot by 16 foot.
12 by 16 foot, very large, high resolution touch screens that we will talk more about how we were able to turn that into an interactive way for on-site visitors to really dig into our collection. But that relates very directly to the mobile experience and the app that we developed, and then to the redesigned website, which is really built on a story-first model that you might have heard about this morning. And we were then thinking about how we would connect that to our social media channels, as well as how that gets connected to our physical labels in the space, but that these all speak to each other. And so we found that when we tried to explain this to people, the best way to do it was to show it. And so we have a little video that features a 21st century app using family. It's, yeah, fabulous.
It starts slow, but it gets really exciting.
Here we go.
That's one of our interns. Almost there.
Someone's stringing that.
Well, you got the gist.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got the gist. That's plenty. Okay, so we'll go back here. Wow, Wi-Fi. Lesson learned, don't use Google Slides. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take it from here just for a few minutes and walk you through the experience from the visitor perspective, starting with the interactive wall in the centerpiece of the Milestones of Flight Hall, Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. Obviously, the whole idea of the experience loop is you can enter from anywhere, but we'll start here. So the idea with the wall content, as you're viewing it here, is that visitors who walk into this hall will see immediately a range of content that rotates between inspiring quotes, facts that call attention to interesting items from history, or interesting questions that we want the visitors to think about, all rolling up into our central theme of aviation and spaceflight transform the world. We want to have a conversation starter for people. We also want them to understand what the museum is all about and be drawn to this immediately. So the other thing that the wall does is you can see other social media pictures over Instagram or Twitter shared by other visitors, and you're encouraged to share your own. We remind people that we have free Wi-Fi and the hashtag to use to get your photos on the wall. And once you log into the free Wi-Fi, you're immediately directed to the GoFlight app. Once you approach the wall, that's where you see these floating circles of objects that are on display throughout the museum. Several objects that are also at our other location to remind people that we have two buildings. And we also have floating bubbles that have topics, and so you can explore by the visual cues of the objects you see in front of you, or use topics to drill down into something you might be interested in personally. There's also tours floating in these bubbles, so you could actually select a tour and see what you might be able to view in the museum on that tour. Selecting any particular object, you get more information about it, immediately some wayfinding information. And then if you use the arrows, you can select through to see a little bit more detail about that object. Very, very concise information to get you moving fluidly through the process and experience as many objects as possible. Surrounding the object are related topics and other objects that are related as well. The objects that you see on the screen here with the little yellow link, that denotes other objects on display that have some kind of distinct connection, whether it's the same person flew both of those objects, they have some kind of innovation that was shared between them, same company developed them. There's a story there. And so we want people to see what those connections are and explore the collection and find things that they're interested in. Once you find something you're interested in, you can tap the little star in the upper right of the circle in the middle and favorite that object. And this little add favorites white bubble will turn yellow and start to count the number of favorites that you collect. Ultimately, when you're done selecting your favorites, you can then sync it to the GoFlight app. And you do that anonymously using a 4-digit code. And Troy has a nice video that shows that onboarding process to the app. Once you're on the app, you can use your favorites to have a personalized tour of the museum and follow those around, or you can just use what we call the objects near me mode, the wandering mode, of letting the app tell you what's around you right now and visual cueing you to what you can see. Or you can go right to an interactive map and use that to explore the objects on display. The app is location aware, so it's always knowing where you are and showing what's around you. Once you go to an object, there's lots of additional content. This is where we really want people to dive into the stories that we have to tell. And it could be video showing the objects in flight from archival footage or interviews with our experts, close looking images, what we call close looking, so calling out very specific features, panoramas inside the objects, and a variety of content that we can deliver through the app interface. The connections piece is also represented on the app, and it's a fun little swipe back and forth interplay that Bluecadet came up with that actually I have a lot of fun playing with, but that's a story for another time. You'll notice on the left side, next to objects near me, there's a top stories tab. You can also read all the stories that are put out through our website on the app, and the idea being that once you leave the museum, or if you even never come to the museum, if you open it outside the building, the first screen you're going to get are stories. And so this is a way to remain connected to the museum and find the new stories that we're sharing at all times through the app. And if you pick a topic that you're interested in, we'll send you notifications when a new story becomes available. And this is how we link back to the website. The same stories that we're putting out through the website are reflected on the app and also through our social media channels, completing the experience loop. So that's a really quick run through of the experience. We have a lot of nuances and information about this project. It was very large. So rather than take you through the whole process step by step, we thought we would break it down into these topics. But we're happy to discuss any topic. We have lots to say, the three of us. So whatever the audience would find most useful to talk about, or we can just run through these and see where it goes. Does anyone have a burning question or topic that they really want to tackle regarding this? Anything? A hand.
You don't have to answer it now, so maybe it would come under design choices. It's an interactive wall.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe how big, what it is. Have you done any studies? Is it really used by
We can jump ahead, no problem. So we're happy to do that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Troy, the wall is an amazement to us. There's a lot there. I think people are familiar with apps and websites, but this wall was just new and interesting. And I tell you, the original concept that we had for it was boring, really boring. And this is where Bluecadet really brought the creativity big time. So I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, I think when we first kicked the project off, one of the big challenges that Vicky's team laid out for us was that they have hundreds of iconic objects hanging around the museum, but most people walking through now didn't live during the time when a lot of these objects were making history, and they don't understand the significance. So we thought there were a number of products we were developing that were going to add context to these objects. But we thought that it really could use this kind of wow, impactful moment when people first walk into the museum and they see instantly some of these objects in context. They see, the lunar landing module landing on the moon, and they see how that object is connected to their broader collection and some of the themes. So we did a lot of designs around form factor.
Mm-hmm.
We sent you a lot of, renderings.
There was one where it went up on the ceiling. It was really cool.
Yeah.
We had a real moment very early, though, where we had hung up foam board to see what it would look like to hang this thing up in the air.
Yeah.
And because it seemed massive, just ginormous when we had it on the ground, and then you hang it up, and everybody was like, eh. It was simultaneously too large, a Times Square E, people worried a lot about that, and too small, not enough wow factor. And we had Bluecadet and Troy in the room and said, we kind of need to finalize this for the drawings by Friday. And it was like Wednesday.
They had like 2-3 days to come up with this awesome
and
idea.
you could see him just thinking, and then he's like, what you're doing is a terrible idea, and we need to start. And it was about if we hang it, we're in the form of a sign, and we start competing with like Times Square and stadiums and signage. And he said, if you root it to the floor, then it's a wall, and people approach it on something that it's something they can touch and they can work with and are not and then that same size is bigger to people, but it also has this intimacy of being able to actually work with it. And that was a huge insight that really got us to what this thing became.
Yeah.
And one of those moments where there was a kind of big pause where you could see him thinking like, I'm just going to blow this apart.
Blurt it out. Yeah. We're like, say it.
And
then
it was hugely useful.
And the project manager just, all the blood left his face, but it was okay. It worked out.
But there were the interface on this was a lot of work. One of the things we're showing is the search.
So yeah, one of the early assumptions that we had going into the wall was that visitors were going to look for a search utility because they might be looking for something specific in the museum. This was some feedback that we had heard about some other wall experiences, around the country. So early on, we designed that experience and some other features, and we were really running into some roadblocks, and it just didn't feel like a fluid, fun interface, and it felt a little segmented for a collaborative multi-user form factor like we were designing.
And our content complicated it a lot also. That, if you're looking for the lunar module, we would call it lunar module. But if you write Moonlander in your search, are you going to pull that up? And how many we have the first American jet, but you would need to know it's called the XP-59A. What are the odds you're going to type that in correctly? So
right, and typing in on that interface just felt wrong. Vertical. It's a vertical wall. No one likes holding their arms up for that long. We just didn't. We couldn't picture a lot of people using it.
And ultimately, we asked the visitor. We just went downstairs and started interviewing people and said, would you use a search? We had these big, screen-sized papers. Speaking of keeping your arms up that long, Sarah, our, tester, was doing this all day with these big posters, so she has really good arm strength now. But yeah, they basically said, no, we're not going to use it. And so you solve two problems, this issue and the fluidity of the interface and the topics all were kind of solved at once.
Yeah, so that was one of the sacred cows we killed pretty early.
Poor cow.
There were some others in the next slide that shows. So we were playing around with this idea of favoriting, so people can kind of create their own tour essentially by discovering these connected objects and then maybe saving them. And we designed a lot of different interfaces for that. This is one that was one of the more complex where it was fun, we thought, but so you're dragging and dropping objects into a little area, and that goes into your favorites bucket. I had some UX issues where that area was fixed to a certain position, and that felt wrong because we knew there were going to be kids, there were going to be adults, and varying heights working on this wall. This was about a point where we started to panic, and we weren't finding the right UX solution for this. And we had done a lot of work to push Vicky's team into this form factor, and they'd really gone to bat for us to push this wall through. And we asked her if we could pull back a little bit and start prototyping. If we could really just start coding by design. And we kind of scratched a lot of these UX features and went right into prototyping and just tried to find the most fun, sticky interface we could. Mm-hmm. And the next view, I think, shows still that top left, where we just started working on this bubble metaphor. And when you tapped an object, it revealed a constellation of content that was related to it, and topics that was related to it. Mm-hmm. And it was that simple. And once we actually prototyped it and played around with the fluidity of it, and every one of those bubbles has its own physics engine, it felt really nice and fun. And we thought that was kind of our aha moment. And we simplified everything else, and everything seemed to work within that one interface.
But there was also the issue that in order to do that, you really needed the full form factor, right? You needed the whole set of screens, which then became Vicky's job to get to talk to our project manager about, we'd like to buy all of them, ship them all to Philly, have them build this entire thing in their studio, work on it, and then deconstruct it and ship it all back to DC, and I'm sure it'll just work fine.
Yeah.
So
that was a fun conversation.
We need all of this hardware 9 months to a year before you thought we were going to need it.
Yeah.
Because there's just no way to test this on individual, small screens and then say, oh, I'm sure it'll work on a ginormous touch screen with a big IR bezel on the sides.
And this is where we really push traditional process, because our museum is very, very used to the kiosk, right? So you just send them one screen, and that'll work for all 5 kiosks that you're going to put in. It's like, no, this isn't a kiosk. This is a completely different thing. The user interface is the whole thing, So that took a little bit of time for folks to understand and let go, but it turned out to be essential in terms of how often we iterated on this. I mean, we drove up to Philly 5 times during the process as a whole group, and one time we listened to Hamilton in Margaret's car. That was fun. But yeah, so it was a real bonding experience going through this whole thing, but it was essential to have that kind of testing to make the interface as fluid as it became. Sorry, there's a question.
I was wondering if you could talk about testing it on high traffic user days, because I'd imagine that the nice pictures of 3 people on the screen is not typically what you see.
So here's a typical high traffic day. Sorry, it's with the whole stats thing, but enjoy the stats. So that's a very good question, and actually that was one of the key concerns from leadership. This is a high traffic area. This is our entry gallery. We have millions of visitors every year. It's a thoroughfare as well, up and down the whole spine of the building. So if we get queues of people from the screen, backing up and waiting for their turn, it could be a nightmare. And we, reassured them over and over again that wasn't what was going to happen. And sure enough, in our observations thus far, on very busy days, I have to be there the day after Thanksgiving to be certain of this, because literally rivers of people that day. But thus far, observations have shown it doesn't happen. It doesn't get overwhelmed. It's incredibly robust. It has not crashed yet. I was told, Ben wants me to mention, Ben is the programmer, it has not crashed yet.
Since July.
Since July 1st.
But Ben also built a
So
prototype.
There's a fallback mode.
This is
That
an
just
opportunity for me to
touched
throw out
it.
some statistics that
Yes.
I love for development. So our developers actually built 21 separate applications just to test, debug, and run performance, different tests. And one of my favorites was one that mimicked thousands of touches on the screen
fun to watch.
happening in real time, and many more than visitors could actually do themselves.
Even our worst middle schoolers.
Yeah, and it's Gorilla Glass. They walk right up and bam. We don't have an art museum audience. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So
So how many people can use it at a time, and how long they can stay? What's the dwell time, basically?
That's a really good question. And actually, two good questions that I get all the time is how many people use it and what is the dwell time? And that is something that we can't get from the touches because it's one big interface. So you have multiple people touching it in real time, and we're just tracking events and touches. We can't track individual frames, right? So just because of the way it's built. So we're talking about getting a security camera that actually measures people, and then we can start looking at people and dwell time. So I don't really have a good answer for you, but it's over 1 million touches to date, and we know what topics people are choosing, and we know what objects people are choosing, and how often they're liking tours. And so the content part of it, we're getting really good data that we can use. But those kinds of things, yeah, we have to work on ways to measure. There was another question in there.
About stickiness.
Sticking. Oh, how many people can use it at the same time? So there's 7 screens in a row. Each one essentially represents a little workstation. So once you start interacting with one of those screens, that becomes your space to favorite things, and create your collection. You can, any floaty bubble that isn't part of your circle, you can move between them, and the teenagers love figuring this out. So it's a really interesting, fluid, cool interface. So.
Yeah, Vicky shared it, that we through observation, we've seen a lot of how people are using the wall, and one of the stories you shared was it's fun to watch families use it. The kids interact with it because it's fun. So they'll throw the bubbles, they'll see how high they can jump to grab the highest bubble, and then if their parents are standing around, the parents will start to engage and start to read some of the content for the kids as they're playing with it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
One of the things as we were developing was also there was a moment where we said, should there be a goal? Should we set, you need to find 5 things you want to see in the museum and put them in your bucket or thing. And in the end, we decided that was not useful, but it was a kind of good midpoint towards developing something that was just endless exploration and trying to think about at what point do we kind of encourage people to move things onto the app and go explore the actual things that are right behind you.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Hi. So the 0.5 uptake.
Yes.
You don't know how many people are using it, so you should get.
That's download. So uptake represents something that a lot of museums use for their on-site apps. Now, keeping in mind that our app really isn't purely on-site. We want people to use it off-site as well. But we use that as a metric because other museums are using it, and it gives some parity. That being said, of the number of people that walk into this building, the downtown building, the percentage of people that are roughly downloading the app, if you did an uptake rate, it would be 0.5%. Our goal that we set for ourselves is 1%. So we're setting targets, right, at the numbers that we want to achieve without really having clear benchmarks. I mean, we've talked to other people who have, apps, museum apps, and their uptake rates, and so we have some sense of what's going on in the cultural sector, but, there isn't a really good one-to-one benchmark, and so we have to just start with baselines.
I should have been clear. I'm Matt from the Museum of Natural History in New York City.
Matt! I didn't recognize you from here.
But I thought that was conversion rate, so that's why.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, now we use uptake too, so
What's yours?
5%.
Ooh. Well played.
Can you change the content? It's such
Yes.
an entry area, like for an event, we're getting a lot of things where they suddenly want to change it for a year or something.
I'm so glad you asked about content. It's my favorite topic, and yours. Yes, the whole thing. We can change it easily, thanks to Bluecadet and the CMS that was created that connects all of this together. We have one central CMS based on our Drupal platform. So it feeds the website, feeds the app, feeds the wall. And we update everything in one place. We can put new slides on the wall. Within like an hour, it'll show up. And so if we have an event, if we have, a launch just happened or some spacecraft just made it to Jupiter, an anniversary when it was celebrate, we can do that kind of thing. We made a conscious decision that the wall is about content and about our themes. It's not about advertisements for the theater. It's not about, those kinds of things. We're sticking with things that are gonna be compelling for our visitors. We wanna try and be relevant and timely. And so that's an experiment as well that we're gonna dive more deeply into with evaluation with our visitors. Is it working? Is this really engaging them.
And it draws directly on the catalog that the curators work with on a daily basis. So we have not created a parallel system. It runs off of TMS, the museum system. And that's a database that the curators have been using for years. And so we didn't have to retrain the curatorial staff either, that, all the work that we've been doing feeds into this, and anything that you do will continue to feed these digital initiatives.
Yeah, the wall, all of the objects on the wall are fed directly from our collections database. So Margaret could literally go in and change a tagline or a title, and it will show up on the wall, or an image.
Very impressive that you can change it like in an hour. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yay, Bluecadet.
We've probably got 30 seconds. The
Yeah.
quickest, or one last statement from some of you?
A parting thought.
Parting thought.
Experience first. Consider the visitor context. We developed content on the digital experience to complement the physical experience, so it's not a duplicate. What else?
The staff really held the hands of the curators to help us think about what stories go physically on the panels in the exhibit, and then what's best told through video or through stories that would be digital online, and being able to have those complement each other to make a set of arguments. So, but that was a lot of work on the curatorial side to think about divvying things up in that way.
And a quick nod to the design thinking process, because that's where the wall concept was born in 2013. So, and talk to visitors constantly. We did it throughout the process, and we're still doing it now. We're still learning from them. We've iterated the app twice already based on visitor feedback, and we're going to continue to just change it. It's all scalable, it's all changeable, so we're really excited to see where it goes.
Very impressive. Thank you.